La, la, la.
Welcome once again to the Letterman podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. I am stoked to be here and do this to talk about all things David Letterman and celebrate. Like I said, I'm a broken record with this crap. I say the unprecedented body of broadcasting work. I truly believe that. It's a good time to be a Dave fan in 2022. Who knew that we were going to be saying that, but we are. And I've got a really awesome guest on the show today. They're all awesome guests, of course. But here's a guy who wrote for The Late Show for 12 years, a baker's dozen years, something like that, 10, 12, 13 years, something like that. Tom Ruprecht is going to be on the show today. But before we do introduce Tom, who I don't know if he goes by Tom or Tommy, but we'll find that out here momentarily. We're going to do a quick sponsor shout out. The lone sponsor so far, but it's a doozy of the Letterman podcast is the Hello Deli. We want to thank Rupert and May for everything that they do. They are a sponsor of our show. This show is brought to you in part by them. And hey, listen, did you break your Late Show mug? Did you, go to New York and get a Late Show with David Letterman shirt? And it's just been years since Dave's been around. And so there's holes in that thing, whatever. Did you know that you can go to hello-deli.com and you can actually get Late Show with David Letterman merchandise? It's one of the only places in the world you can actually get officially licensed Late Show with David Letterman merchandise. You can get Rupert shirts, all sorts of stuff. If you're from the New York area, go to the Hello Deli, go get a sandwich, go say hello to Rupert and May. And if you want some of this merchandise back again, do you need a Late Show cap? They're stylish and they advertise that you love the Late Show with David Letterman. You can go there right now, hello-deli.com, and get yourself some official David Letterman merchandise. I feel so good. I don't feel cheap or used at all after I plug that sponsor. It is the greatest thing in the world. I just appreciate Rupert, and we've had Irene, Rupert's girl Irene, on here a couple of times already. And I just thank you very much, Rupert, for sponsoring us. We appreciate this. It's a lot of fun. Now that the chores are done, the heavy lifting is done, it's time to get to some fun. Tom Ruprecht, thank you so much for coming on our show today. I can't tell you how big of a thrill it is for me to be conversing with you, man.
And I would just like to say your heavy lifting is not done, because I am not going to give you an inch. You are going to be pulling teeth this entire interview.
Yes.
I'm not going to crack.
Outstanding. Oh, this is phenomenal.
I go by Tom or Tommy, whichever you would prefer.
Okay. Fair enough. I every time I've seen, like when Strahan and them were saying goodbye to you, it seemed like they were calling you Tommy. It seemed I think people who know me tend to go with Tom. People who actually have talked to me and know how immature I am, they tend to go with Tommy. But I guess whenever I write something, I usually sign it Tom to try to give me just a smidge of credibility. But, a little bit of professionalism.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that immaturity goes both ways, sir, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that you're so enthusiastic and have this kind of unbridled enthusiasm. I share that same gifting. I want to get into it. So you were a long-term writer on The Late Show.
Yes, I was. I was there for a while. Yes.
Incredible. And some of the things that you have seen, I want to get into some of those highlights here and whatnot. But at the end of the day, every single time we have a former staffer on here, I want to know how you started working there. And I know that's a cliche question. I hopefully will be able to ask you some stuff that you haven't been asked before, but I think it's really important for people out there to understand how some of these people got started and became associated with Dave and Company. So how did it start for you?
I was a fan of the show, and when I was in college, I was watching the show, and they did a piece where they mentioned the interns, and that kind of fired off synapses in my brain, like, wow, I bet that would be fun. Little did I know. But so the show was on at NBC at the time, so I called just the main line at NBC, and some NBC person invited me in for an interview, and I did that, and they liked me, and so then they put me on the list to interview with the Letterman people, and so I got called back in to do that. And actually, the person who I believe you interviewed like last week, or Daniel Kellison,
Yeah.
He interviewed me, and the way it works is like there were like internships for like 8 different departments at the show. And so what you would do is you would come in as a prospective intern, and you would do the round robin, and you would interview 8 different people, and hopefully one of those 8 interviews would go well, and one of those departments would want you as an intern. So my first interview was with Daniel, and it was fine. And Daniel was then supposed to take me and hand me off to, the next person. And then I would have 8 interviews. I didn't know. So I interviewed with Daniel. The interview finished, and Daniel said, "All right, now what am I supposed to do with you?" And I went, "I don't know," because no one had told me, but Daniel was supposed to know to hand me off. And so he goes, "All right, I'll walk you the elevator," and so I left. And only later did I find out that, like, instead of having 8 shots at an internship, I just had 1 now, like, and that I had just dramatically killed my chances. But fortunately, Daniel liked me well enough that he picked me.
Oh my God. Okay, so he was out of research at that point. He was a segment producer at the time then?
He was, yeah. He had recently been promoted. Yeah, he was a relatively new segment producer. I think he had just gotten the job, I think. And so yeah, I was now doing research for Daniel to try to help him find information for guest segments. And
what year was this, about approximately?
This would have been 1989 into 90.
We got into it a little bit with Dan, but at the end of the day, researching back then, a completely different planet, different solar system to researching now.
Yes.
I mean, my gosh.
See, now this was the days before the internet.
Yeah.
It was also the day, this is something you would take for granted now because everything's on YouTube. But back then, there was no YouTube. And like one of the charming things on like our show was it was a place to occasionally see during a guest interview, like someone's like first appearance on TV.
Sure.
Such and such, so-and-so before they were famous, maybe they were on The Dating Game or something like that. Sure. And so one of the jobs of the researcher was to try to dig up all that old footage, which back then was really hard because all this footage was just kept in warehouses of various production companies. And so you would have to like see like, okay, 20th Century Fox owns The Dating Game, and you would have to find the air date and then call somebody and then just like try to convince them to go to the warehouse and get the clip out, cut the clip and send it to you. And it was like a very arduous process. And it was a lot of legwork, like trying to track down that kind of stuff. And now it's just, it's all on YouTube. And also it was research because there was no internet. You were just kind of like, you weren't just researching the guests, you were also just sort of like the librarian for everyone at the show. Just everyone at the show who had questions that today they could answer on the internet, they would just call you with just random stuff. And like I remember once Dave was thinking about getting a place in Montana, which he's been very, very happily, and and I remember his assistant called me, and because I was in research, I was the guy to ask. She asked, like, "Will bears be a problem in this part of Montana?" And I was like, "Geez, I don't know." And so I was like, "What am I supposed to do?" And so, like, she named the town, and I called the hardware store in the town. And like as I'm talking to them, I'm knowing what the answer is going to be. I said, like, "Hey, I'm thinking of buying a place in Montana. I'm just worried, are bears a thing, And as I'm saying it, I know that I come across like this jerk, New York jerk, and like, and sure enough, the guy in the hardware store is like, "Hey, Harvey, this is a guy for," and they're all laughing at me and like, "Oh, you scared of bears and everything." And so then I get off the phone and I call Dave's assistant, and like, he's fine, buy the house. There's no bears. Dave buys the house. And then I don't know, a few months later, he's in the house. He walks into his kitchen and there's a freaking bear in his kitchen.
Exactly. Little did he know.
And then, so I felt kind of bad about that. Oh, well, I guess I wasn't very good at research, I think is what we're all getting at.
Okay, I want to know, how long did you do that job for? Like, clearly with your personality and all that, I can see how you would have evolved over to the writers and all that stuff. But how long did the research job last?
Probably like 3 or 4 years, I guess.
Oh, wow. Because you did it for a while.
Yes.
Okay. So when you took that job, did Kellison basically hand you a Rolodex of contacts of some of these different places that you could go to? Or was it you building relationships with some of these folks along the way who were the gatekeepers of whatever this information that you were in charge of getting?
It was a little of both, like Daniel gave me a Rolodex, but then, Daniel's personality. So, often he had burned those bridges, so I was now starting from scratch. The last thing I wanted to tell him was that I was friends with Daniel Kellison. No, Daniel. I'm sure this came up in his interview, but like, there's no better segment producer in television history, I would bet. Like, no one crafted a better segment than Daniel, and so it was a thrill to kind of get my start working for him, and it helped me just immeasurably. Yes.
I'm having so much fun with this process because I am such a big enthusiast, of course, of what you guys all did. But through the process of doing this show, I talked to many of you guys, and hearing you give shots back and forth to each other, good-natured shots. Like I described this, you guys had a family, and we've talked about this on the show a few times. It's a lot of fun to be the relayer of these types of messages and things like that. And if a fight begins at some point because of me doing that, either knowingly or unknowingly, being used as a pawn by one of you guys, I think my job will be done. I think that would be a good thing. If an actual fist fight between one of you guys begins, I think that would be a good thing.
There will be no fist fight. In fact, like, just to show you, like Daniel, like a bunch of years ago, Dave got the Mark Twain Award down in DC, and like Dave very kindly asked me to like help him with his speech, and so I did, and we were down there during the ceremony, and Jimmy Kimmel was there. He was taking part in the thing, and Daniel was with Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel remarked that he really liked something in Dave's speech. And like Daniel like dragged Jimmy Kimmel all the way down these hallways just to bring him over to me and be like, this is Tom Ruprecht. You should, he's the guy who did this. Yeah. And it was just like so kind. And like Daniel has done a million nice things for me. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about that. We talked about that on his episode too. With he is eternally in charge of paying it forward because Steve O'Donnell did that for him. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing, how he was an intern, just come in there, didn't know anything, thought he knew some things, wrote some things, to try and impress. And O'Donnell actually took time to take him out for lunch and say, okay. And he went through the whole thing with him and showed him so much kindness. And he said that eternally he will do that for people because of that. And that is not an isolated incident with you guys and gals. I hear that all the time. There's a very cool atmosphere that you had people around you who, whether or not they were there for a long period of time or their job was just to hold the baton for, a few hundred meters and then hand it off to somebody.
Right.
You guys really did seem to take care of each other and to be there for each other.
It was nice because you hear, like, I never worked at Saturday Night Live, but like you often hear that it's kind of a cutthroat environment. I mean, I don't know if it's testimony to having to do a show every day. Like at some point, you're gonna need favors from everyone on staff, just because like there's just so much chaos and so like it was really, really a nice place to work. Like everyone really looked out for each other, and like that's why I stayed there a ridiculously long time. I was probably there total of like 17 years, which is crazy in TV to stay someplace that long. But the reason is because I mean they became my friends, and I ended up marrying a woman who worked there, and it was really a great environment.
I love that. I love that so much. And so you made the transition then from NBC to CBS.
I did. So my internship was at NBC. I then went back, finished college. When I was finishing college is when the show switched, and then soon after they got to CBS, I graduated, and then I got once again, Daniel was one of the people who helped bring me in to get a job there. Yeah,
that's amazing. I don't know if there's a more historic moment. I mean, I love Carter's books, and I love looking at the history of it and whatnot. But living it, like, I don't know if it's underrated or not. But when people talk about the biggest moments that happened in television history or broadcasting history, to me, that is the number one moment. To me, that is the pinnacle moment of a shift. The Carter's book originally, The Late Shift.
Right.
I mean, so prophetic in its title. It wasn't just hosts moving and whatnot. The entire landscape changed. A franchise, again, I go off like a broken record. I go deep on this one.
Right.
A franchise had never, ever taken on The Tonight Show and made any sort of dent in it at all. Never mind the number one stuff. Who cares about that? Nobody had ever competed.
Yes.
And then when that shift happened,
Yep.
Monumental. I do think it's one of the biggest moments in broadcasting history.
Yeah.
You were there early on. What was the pressure like when before you kind of settled in and if you ever did get comfortable? I don't know if you ever did, but what was that pressure like when you started working there? Was it just all hands on deck, us versus them? Was that part of it, or was it just we want to do right by Dave and help him put on a great show? I know how loyal everybody was. Like,
I mean, I guess, there was, there was a Leno, there was, some pressure with Leno and competing with that. But I really, that was kind of a macro existential pressure. But I think what you felt day to day was more the pressure to do a good show. And then also just because Dave is extremely demanding and, hard on himself and hard on the material, and like is continually would continually rip stuff out, and we'd be rewriting the show a half hour before. And so a lot of the pressure was generated by kind of that was the prime driver of the stress.
The desire to have the best show possible, and then do it again tomorrow, and do it again tomorrow, and do it again tomorrow. The Groundhog Day effect must have just been bonkers.
It was weird because you would just you would finish the show, and we would tape in the late afternoon, and then you'd come upstairs after the show and it would be like 6:30 or something, and then you'd be like, oh gosh, we have an empty slate for tomorrow, and then we need to put in a couple hours now to just try to and you're so burned out. It truly was. It was a big grind.
What by the time you got, I'm sorry that we're jumping around here so much, but I'm just so excited to be doing this, and hopefully this won't be the last time you come on here. We can pick the brain and get a little more granular. But when you were writing for The Late Show, when you got to that place where you were a regular writer, all of that, what did your day look like? Did it start early, or were you a typical stand-up type mentality where you work real late and then sleep in a little bit? What did it look like?
Okay, that's what I'm gonna give you an answer in parts because it shifted.
Great.
It like when I first became a writer, it was the day would start usually 10 in the morning, but we would go till 11 or midnight. We would go late. It kind of shifted downwards. It then became we would go in 8:30 or 9 in the morning, and we would leave at 8. That it kind of over the course of the show, it shifted. It shifted that way. Yeah.
Okay. And when you get in the morning, is it a continuation of the stuff you left on the desk? Would you kind of like a game of pool, give yourself a bit of a leave for the next morning, or was it basically in the morning? Okay, here's what we're doing.
It was usually the show. What we would write would be kind of broken down to, I don't know what exactly the percentage is, but say maybe 60-40, maybe 60% of the stuff is kind of what you would call evergreen material, which it's not tied to that day's news. So that's stuff you can write beforehand. Right. And then maybe 40% of the show's content will be stuff based on that day's news. So most of what you're doing, usually what you're doing after the show at night is kind of the evergreen stuff, loading up the cupboard for the days ahead. Yeah. And then the day of when you get into work, that day till showtime is generally spent reacting to that day's news. And so usually what we would do is we would start with a writer's meeting. so you would come in and you would basically, again, this is, back in when there were newspapers, you'd come in and it would be like cramming for a test. You would take 20 minutes, go into an office and just read through like 5 newspapers and really sort of get, a global feel of what's going on in the world. And then the writers would get together and then kind of talk about like just a billion ideas of what we should do for that day's show. And then, those would get pitched to Dave, and then Dave would kind of winnow it down a little. And then, because a lot of stuff we're doing is like fake commercials. And so you're kind of right. Because that stuff takes a little time to put together. You would generally like you would come up with ideas like for fake commercials or things that need voiceover and need to be edited. Dave would approve, maybe 8 of them.
Sure.
So then you're working on those, you're writing those scripts, you're bringing in voiceover people, you're cutting that voiceover, and then it's going to take a couple hours for the various people to get the videotape you need to start editing. So while they're getting that videotape, usually that's when then you go back to your office and you would write top 10 jokes, and you do that for about 2 hours, and then generally you would then get called down to the edit room. You'd start putting your pieces together that need to be edited. Those would go to Dave. This is like a half hour before the show. He'd watch all the video, and then he has changes. And
sure.
so like the voiceover guys were all new to be local, like at like a half hour before showtime, because we would call them back to like re-record lines, and then we'd have to re-edit the video. In time for the show.
That is, you just mentioned a whole bunch of things that don't necessarily sound like they go together in a cohesive day. Now, I'm talking to some of the folks who work for the show. Certain people seem to gravitate towards, certain types of part, whether it be the top 10 list or the monologue or things like that. Was there an area that you focused on as a part of the writing team? First off, was it a team, or were you guys more run and gun, competitive, that kind of a thing, or was it no, you do this, I'll do that?
Well, I mean, there were some things we would write as a group, some things you do on your own.
Yep.
We weren't competitive. Again, like getting back to that, it wasn't really a cutthroat thing. Like people were always willing to help like each other. Like give somebody is stuck on a script and somebody else would give them a line. As far as like specialties, I used to, for a bunch of years, I would shoot a bunch of the remotes where I would kind of like go with Biff to the Super Bowl, go with Biff to the Olympics, nice. I did a lot of that kind of stuff. There was a thing, Great Moments in Presidential Speeches, that ran for a bunch of years.
Yeah, I'm sure was.
That was my idea. And so, I would watch every Bush speech, because every day we'd need a new kind of like goofy clip for that. I always loved writing top 10 jokes just because it was just, we knew how to pick topics that were easy to write jokes for. And so you would just like write like 100 jokes in the span of a couple hours. And it was just always fun to like just crank out stuff like that. I always enjoyed that.
I'm glad you brought up the remotes and whatnot. And you know what, I was going to ask this later in the show, but I'll ask it now, and then we'll probably get to more of it. And there's probably so many. I mean, again, the idea that you guys churned out so much stuff, and then even YouTube came up while you were doing this. YouTube wasn't even around at that point. So much gold. And the reason for this show is the gold that was brought out at breakneck speed and then forgotten. Well, it's time to go back and look at some of that gold. And there's so much of it. The question is this: are there any remotes, like Great Moments in Presidential History? Oh my God, I'm so glad the official channel put out a super video of that had at least a dozen of them all in one. I'm so glad that Walter and his team are doing what they're doing now. But are there moments other than that one? Are there moments that kind of, okay, Tom, what was something that you are really, really proud of, or that you remember that was just really, really awesome that you were a part of, or that you helmed?
Oh gosh, I don't know. see, here's the problem, I could say something, I'm really proud of this, but then the listeners are going to look it up on YouTube and they're going to be like, he's proud of that? Oh my God, that's garbage.
Doesn't matter. Who gives a shit? That does not matter. We're talking
what I really liked, like I didn't like doing the Super Bowl because that was just so insane. It was and then you'd be shooting till the Super Bowl's over, you'd shoot post game, you'd sleep for a couple hours, and you'd wake up and you'd take a 6 a.m. flight back to New York, and then you'd have to edit the piece in time for that night's show. And so that was just always crazy. I used to love doing the remotes at Yankee spring training. I'm not a Yankee fan, but I'm a huge baseball fan. And just the pace of spring training, it was nice to be out of the show for a couple of days, which again is stressful, and just to be at spring training, which is a very laid back vibe. And yeah, that was like my favorite thing to do.
That's awesome. And you got to know, throughout the entire show, being on staff and whatnot, but you're traveling with Biff. I'm sure you got to know him in a special, unique way.
Spent a lot of time with Biff. Yeah, that was another pleasure of the job. Just a wonderful guy. Yeah.
Ruprecht G and I are friends, and one of the descriptions I have for Ruprecht G is it's like God took the word kind and made it into a human being. Yeah. Biff is another one of those guys where it seems to me what you see is what you get. The genuineness that goes through the camera, whether he was sitting with Dave, whether he was just answering a question for Dave with his clipboard or something like that, or in one of his segments, it seems like the guy that you see in any one of those examples is the guy who he is.
Well, I think that's very well put. And I think you're sort of getting to what I think is almost like the essence of the show, which, not that there was a mission statement, but I think were there to be one when Dave started, was taking the artifice out of show business. And, our skits aren't going to be performed by these, these fake actors. It's going to be the guy who's the stagehand and, showing humans the way they really are. And so, yeah, that was the philosophy of the show. It's just kind of like just capturing regular thing or people behaving normally.
The little moments of life that everybody lives. It's a communal thing, and I think going back to the macro of it, as you put it, I think one of the reasons why you guys were able to create something that was completely different than the Tonight Show was exactly that. We talk about how you break the fourth wall. People on this the people we're going to have as guests on this show are also folks who had interactions with the show, either unexpected or dream come true moments, whatever. The example I always use, Dave calls a payphone, right? And then somebody picks up. The person who picked up that payphone, many of them 20 years later are still talking about it because they had such a cool moment.
A life event,
And it was just celebrating every day, calling the cleaning lady across the street, all that kind of stuff. Were you part of any of these everyday moments? Were there times where you said, hey, Dave, you should call this person or talk to this person? Is that?
No, but one thing that you said that reminded me that there's a wonderful guy named Hal Gurney who was the director of Late Night and the first few years of Late Show.
I had a phone conversation with him 3 days ago.
Oh, he's then he's the best. He's another delightful person.
Absolutely.
But so he was also the director when Dave had his morning show before Late Night. And he was telling me once that like in one of the first shows they did, there was a musician. I want to say Judy Collins, could be wrong, but Judy Collins. She came on and she was singing and she starts to sing and the mic isn't working. And so she sings her first line and nothing's coming out. And Dave's kind of looking around and Judy's looking around and Hal just got on the PA and went, Judy, hold on for a sec. Your mic's not working. Just give us a second. We'll get it right. And, okay, Judy, you can start singing. And then she does her song. And Hal said after the show, Dave rushed back to him and was not mad, but just the opposite. Was like, that's what I want the show to be. Like, it felt real. And again, it's stripping away that artifice of TV and showing you like what's going on behind the scene. Not everything's perfect, we were showing warts and all of what it is to do a TV show.
Well, and I think Kellis and I talked about this too, because he worked with Hal on a bunch of other projects. It sounds to me like Hal's the guy that made a historical run in broadcasting and then retired half a dozen times, only to be brought back to make another historical run on something else and show his genius in other ways.
Exactly. Yeah. Like for instance, like I do in the remotes, like when the Olympics were in Utah, you know, Hal came out of retirement to direct those, and so he and I spent 2 weeks in Utah, and then we spent another week in Italy when the Olympics were there, and that was just great life experience, just hanging out with Hal in these locales for a couple of weeks. He is really great.
Well, groundbreaking a director of broadcasting, but also a character on the show. Like the fact that you know, I always talk about my big moment there that's behind my shoulder there. By the way, also recently, not just my moment there, signed to my best friend by Dave himself. That's Dave making fun of me there. And the picture got taken. The best part about that, well, there's a lot of best parts about it, but was, you know, I think if you're a Letterman enthusiast, you would have felt this in college for certain. And you're in that audience. If you're lucky enough to be the recipient of a Hal Gurney quick cut to you in the audience, you know, which of course stayed on long after he retired, it became a show you know, mainstay. That's one of the greatest moments in the entire world, and that came from Hal being a character, not just a director, but a character who would isolate people in the audience and things like that. It's such a neat thing that I don't know was done really ever before that. Certainly not in a talk show format where they just loosened it up and the inmates kind of ran the asylum.
It's what good can come when you have a director who also has a good comedic mind. And Hal was able to see like who's a personality in the audience that I can cut to. And, you know, not everybody, especially in those days, like, you know, it wasn't automatic that a comedy show was going to have a comedy director, you know, like, I think in those days, like they put like, oh, this guy directed game shows. Yeah, he can direct the late night show. And you know, but like Dave was, I think, very smart. Like, no, this guy directed Jack Parr. He knows how to direct a comedic talk show, you know, and that was
let him speak, let him be a part of it. I think that's the other thing that I love so much is that there was a lot of members of the team that got to do that. You think of Tony Mendez, like the body of work of Tony Mendez, never mind everything else. Oh my God, that guy. You know, Don Giller put up a compilation of Tony shortly after his passing, and holy smokes, the things that some of these support people on the show could do. Did you ever write anything for any of these people? Like, did you ever write anything for Hal or Jerry? Did you ever write anything for Tony? Or did that stuff just, you know, organically grow on its own and become almost, you know, their own type of writing for the show?
I didn't write for, like Jerry Mulligan?
I was thinking Jerry Foley, like the director.
I didn't write anything for Jerry Foley because he was a little busy directing the show, so we didn't use him as much. But but yeah, like I used to write. Yeah, I'd write stuff for Tony, you know, for Coulter, of course, for Rupert. But and so that's like, you know, it depends on the bit. Like there are definitely things that are just purely organic, where Dave can be doing the monologue and suddenly Tony misspelled a word.
Sure.
On the cue card, and then Dave's calling him out and Tony's firing back, and you know, that can become 45 seconds of just purely organic funny stuff. But then there are also other times where you set up a bit where, you know.
Yes. No, and the question was more like, okay, so Hal or Jerry Foley or whatever, would you ever like build into any of the things that you wrote? Okay, and then they could cut over to this or cut over to that, or that was they were separate characters on their own?
Again, there were times where they would find their own thing. There were times where as you're writing something, you're like, oh, I think it would be good to have this shot. And so you talk to them about it. Yeah.
That's cool.
Again, yeah, it's both. It's both.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. I want to, anybody who was there for the 9/11 episode, I you know, what a segue and transition that is, Mike. Well done. You're a pro at this. Let's go from talking about legendary directors and zaniness and these amazing bit players to one of the most traumatic moments in human history, American history. I'd be remiss. We're 34 minutes into this already. I don't know how much time I have. I hope you know, I hope we can go a little longer here.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate it, man. you were there, during the 9/11 tragedy.
Yes.
And for me personally, I live in Western Canada.
Yeah.
And I can say this with my heart. Like, I was given permission to kind of move on from David Letterman.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Dave, it was all of you.
I'm going to stop you right there because that first show back, I mean, that is purely Dave. That all of that was him talking from his heart, and I think there was no way to kind of write. It had to be his honest human reaction.
Yeah.
It's hard to write that for a person, and Dave. Yeah, so Dave deserves all the credit because that's a tight wire that, like, I mean, before the show started, I was like nervous for him. Like, I don't know how you thread this needle, but no, he did tremendous.
Absolutely. And one of the many ways that he has proven that he's the greatest broadcaster in human history.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. The question that I have for you is, watching the days and weeks and months after 9/11.
Yes.
Knowing the crazy dynamics of cultural and the stuff that was making the news. Yes. How you guys treated President George W. Bush beforehand. Yes. Versus after that moment. And I even remember it was transitioning. It felt like it was 2 or 3 weeks after that first show where Dave was like, "Hey, Paul, can we try a joke here? Should we try a joke?"
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
he
yeah.
would actually note it.
Yeah.
What was that like in the writer's room for you guys as that time was passing by, as the reality, the new normal was setting in?
Yeah.
Were you guys constantly still writing material, or was it a day-by-day thing?
We were writing materials because you had to, but yeah, it was a day-to-day finding your footing. The first thing that jumps to mind talking about this, and I don't even know if this is true, but like, I seem to remember just, like the analogy I gave about cramming for a test when you come in the morning, and you tear through the newspapers. It was very strange in that during that period, you would come in and you would tear through the newspapers and it would be nothing but news you couldn't joke about,
Yeah.
And so I remember us, before I was talking about how the balance between topical humor and evergreen humor, I remember during that period, it was just like, you couldn't make topical jokes because it was just grim. And like, I remember it's just like, I think at one point, like, doing a top 10 list about the Jolly Green Giant, just because it was silly and it won't hurt anyone's feelings or make people cry. So I remember that being an odd time. I was not a huge fan of George W. Bush, even in the days after 9/11. So I kind of very quickly wanted to get back on and making jokes about the administration, criticizing the administration. Dave was kind of wary about that. Like, we need to hang back. And
but
so
carefully,
yeah. And so that went, in my memory, it went a couple months. And then I remember there was a weekend in, I want to say December or January, where the president had bruises. He had abrasions on his face. And it was because the president choked on a pretzel and fell down and hit his head on a table and bruised his cheek. And
thank you, God.
I remember
it's fine again.
At that point, Dave kind of nodded and went, "Yeah, okay, I guess we can make fun of this guy again." Like, I think Superman has lost his cape.
Oh, that's tremendous. I love it.
Wanted to pretend he's this wartime president.
Defining moment of the Late Show and its tone. Okay, we can go and do this again. There's a beautiful moment of normalcy, and again, the great moments in presidential history. I mean, they wrote themselves in many ways, but you guys were able to leverage them so beautifully. Like, everything in that segment there, I love that segment, and I love the editing. I've always loved the editing of Dave's stuff. The quick edits. The fraction of a jingle, and then it's gone, and then it's like I just love that style, how quick it was, and what a what a great thing that you were a part of,
that's
man.
Dave. I mean, that's something that I've learned that I've carried with me, and I think it's really true, is Dave. I mean, his note on almost everything was shorter. Like he really, and I would watch, and so like it would be frustrating at times, because I would like when I would do those remotes where I would go someplace for 3 days and shoot a piece, and then like, there'd be like a lot of jokes that I would want in there, and I would want like a big piece, but Dave was always. And I would watch other shows, and their remotes would be like 7 or 8 minutes,
Right.
And I would be like, oh my gosh, I want that kind of real estate. But Dave was always like, no, the remote should be 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. And I remember like, I would hand in like, a 5-minute cut of the piece, and I would get word back like, it's fine, but it needs to be 3.5 minutes. Cut whatever you want.
Sure.
Like it's just there's no bad joke here necessarily that I want out. It's just more I want it short. And like and I don't think I was there. I don't remember, but like I have a memory of Dave at a rehearsal, and there was he was watching some piece where it was kind of it was a joke where I'm doing a lousy job of explaining this, but it was basically the joke hit the premise, and then it just furthered. It was just, there was a joke and then another example of hitting the same premise and another
redundant a little bit, like little redundancy.
All fine jokes, but like Dave was watching it and he just went, it's, it doesn't get funnier, and like that's very true. Like the jokes might be fine, but you've already had the great version of that joke the first time. The audience has already got, like, it's not going to get funnier now. It's like, cut your losses, take your win, take your laugh, and end the piece there.
Hit the drum one time. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
I love that. I love this insight that you're bringing me. It's funny, at the beginning of these things, I get really like I get fanboy. I totally do. And then the discussion starts, and the insights that you're providing here, Tommy, are tremendous. I'm so grateful for this here. You talked a little bit about this in our last few paragraphs there, the idea of things that were written and then cast aside, not necessarily because they were bad.
Right.
This is really putting you on the spot, but I have always wondered this ever since I was in high school reading about this stuff. I nerded out about this stuff, and I always wondered, like, the stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor for whatever reason. This is really putting you on the spot, and there might be nothing, because it seems like you just almost can't have nostalgia or a memory of things or whatever, because it's just so fast and you got to stay current.
Yeah.
Were there any moments that you guys either shot something or you wrote something, or and it was almost there, but then now we cast it aside? Were there any that you were like, God damn, I wish we could have had that one in the show?
Man, that's a great question. I mean, like, honestly, like, Dave, I would say, like, your success rate generally, like, for a writer, even a good writer, was about 10%. I would think, for like, every one thing you get on, 9 things are getting shot down.
It ain't baseball. It's less than baseball.
So like that, so that very quickly you kind of lose that. You understand that that's the gig. And
there's no taking anything personal in this game.
Yeah, and you develop a callus, and so it's funny, like, when you mention it, the joke that springs to mind, I now realize, is from one of my first weeks as a writer, and it's probably because I hadn't developed that callus yet. And so
that's fascinating.
And I remember there was a top 10 we did. There was an a news story that some company, some pharmaceutical company, had developed basically Prozac for dogs.
Sure.
And so we did a top 10 list of top 10 depressing thoughts your dog has. And so all the jokes are from the perspective of a dog, depressing thoughts your dog has. And I had one that I thought was just I thought, I don't know. I thought it was a smart joke, and, didn't hurt anybody. And it frustrated me that Dave didn't pick it, but it was okay. Depressing thoughts your dog has. And it was, I'm turning 40 this year, and 41, and 42, and 43, and 44. Who doesn't love a dog aged 7 years?
It's 7. Oh my God, that's fantastic. That is very clever.
And then another thing another thing I shot over weeks. I had this thing called Late Show the Movie, which then I saw later Kimmel did kind of a similar thing, but it was as big stars would come through for their interviews, I would grab them before the show, and it was basically I had this trailer for a fake Late Show movie that had like Julia Roberts, just every Tom Hanks, Jason Bateman, all these star-studded, and for whatever reason, I don't know, Dave just saw it and then was like, I don't know, he kind of queasiness about the idea of a Late Show movie, like who are we pretending that and I was like,
wow.
Not many other hosts would have turned down kind of that amount of
I was gonna say because the next question I have is learning to write in Dave's self-deprecating voice and things like that, and I feel like him kind of being standoffish about that has to do with the fact that I see that being a really funny Late Show type joke, and then finishing it off with and David Letterman, and then having a picture like a punchline that leads to self-deprecation almost. I get that. That seems to me, it's so crazy talking to you, because you do talk in the voice of something that I've watched forever. It's so interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever said that to you or not. Maybe I'm nuts. I am nuts, but
no, you're
really,
not. You
God damn, you got that sensibility there. Did it take a long time for you to learn to write in Dave's voice or sensibility? And was it conscious, or was it just being in the environment, it just kind of showed up?
Yeah, it personally, like I could see that being hard for a lot of people, and you would see it a lot with a lot of new writers, because I mean, it's crazy the amount of sort of like trap doors there are in Dave's mind, like reasons he will have to kill a piece, and just like these little landmines that writers will put in their piece that they don't even realize that it's it's going to be a reason for Dave to be like, oh no, we're not doing that, and so I think just I had been around for several years before I even became a writer, and so I think I had a pretty good sensibility, not 100% obviously, but like had a pretty good sense of what he would do, what he wouldn't do, and yeah.
I don't want to go too far into inside baseball with this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Are there any of those landmines that you can kind of talk about, like that are fairly generic or just basic? Don't talk about this because of, or don't ever talk about this. It's right. It's a personal life thing, or something like that. Like,
that's a great question. I don't know if I have anything loaded up, but yeah, there would be. And also, I'm going to reverse myself now.
Pivot, yeah. Go for it.
I remember Hillary Clinton telling a story once when, like in '92, when when Bill was running for president, and kind of the moment when she realized her life had changed. She asked somebody for a Dr. Pepper, and they got her a Dr. Pepper. And then she was like, the rest of the campaign, everywhere she went, every hotel room, there was just Dr. Peppers. There were Dr. Peppers. There were Dr. Peppers. And so I always would check myself, like I would always wonder, like some of the rules we have about Dave, how many of those are things that we've now made hard, fast rules because he said it once, and maybe it was just that particular thing, and we've tried to universalize it, I always wonder, sometimes did we go too far with that, like hamstringing ourselves, like, oh, we better not do this because Dave doesn't like that.
Unnecessary boundaries because you didn't like it one time or whatever. Yeah. And you guys made it into an institutional rule. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, I don't know.
No, that's.
Can I tell another story?
Yes. Oh my God! As many as you want.
This doesn't involve Dave, but it kind of made me. I was reminded of it with the Dr. Pepper story, and kind of the best version of that kind of power of celebrity. There was a guy who was an intern at the show who then later did an internship at Skywalker Ranch, which is where they do the Star Wars films.
Sure is.
So he was an intern there. when I think they were doing one of the prequels.
Wow.
And so George Lucas comes into this conference room where they're having a meeting, and there's a big conference room table, and on one wall is a window into the next room where they're building, droids or whatever. They're building some sort of, Star Wars creature.
Yeah.
So George Lucas is talking in the conference room, and out of the corner of his eyes, he's keeping a view of what's going on with the building in the next room. And then he sees that they're kind of going down the wrong path in how they're building things. So he goes, excuse me. He gets up, he walks towards the wall, and he has to head out the door and take 2 steps and walk in the other door to get into the next room where the window is looking.
Yes.
And as he's doing that, he just under his breath said, oh, it would have been nice if there was a door here. So the next day, he's in the conference room, and he walks in and he sees that now there is a door there in the conference room. And he went, did you guys put a door here just because I mumbled that? And they were like, yes. And he goes, don't do that kind of stuff. I was just talking out loud. Do not do that kind of stuff. And they were like, okay. He comes in the next day. He looks, there's no door. They've removed the door now. And he was just like, stop. It was like Midas trying to stop making things turn gold,
Oh my God. That is, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Like I don't know that I can go as deep on Star Wars as I can with Letterman stuff, but I can go deep. And that is one of the best showbiz kind of example stories I've ever heard of something like that. That is it's the fact that it went back again. That's even funnier.
That's the third time is what makes it the charm.
Yeah, oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
God, I want to. I want to talk to you about the writer's strike because again, there's a bunch of things that I'm piling in here in case it is the only opportunity I ever get to speak with you, and then anything else from here is cake. You would have seen 2 writer's strikes or just one? I guess just the one.
Just one.
That was a real interesting time in comedy. I saw a group of you. I don't know if you were on the panel or not, but there was a panel that was done during the writer's strike where a few of you were on a stage talking about it. Somebody made a joke like, how does it feel like being able to use David Letterman as your personal sock puppet, something like that. The writer's strike was a very interesting time, and it was interesting in the fact that you guys ended up getting a separate deal than everybody else.
Yes.
Could you talk about the writer's strike? Any memories that pile up as I say those clumsily put together words?
The words were lovely. I guess I didn't understand the responsibilities of a union. When the strike was first announced, I was like, because you're on this hamster wheel at the Late Show, and then suddenly it was like, oh, a strike for an indefinite amount of time, and I, part of me was kind of like, oh, nice, I get to sleep in, and
I'm not allowed to write. I'm not allowed
exactly.
to.
So I was kind of thrilled, but then I was told by the union that no, we have to go march, and so suddenly. You're not getting paid, but you have to go out every day and stand in the cold and march. And again, it should have occurred to me that yes, this is the responsibility of a union, and this is where all the good things come from a union. But the thing the reason I mention it is the first day of the strike. The march was at 30 Rock, and it was the first day of the strike, and so a lot of media was there, and just a lot of stars who have writing credits. Yep. Were there also marching and getting their picture taken in the paper that first day. Day 2 and subsequent days, no more celebrities. No more celebrities except Seth Meyers. There was never a day where I was marching and Seth Meyers wasn't there, and I was so impressed by it. And I just wanted to give him a little shout out that he was on air talent, and yet he was plugging away every day.
On-air talent, but a writer before that, though, right?
Yeah.
Always a diehard writer. And so many. This is a great question for you now that people have seen you and heard you for 50 minutes or so. A lot of writers start writing. Dave himself, Tom Dreesen talked about this. He wanted to, when Dave jumped in the truck and moved out to Hollywood, yeah, the aspirations of getting on the Tonight Show, sure. But at the end of the day, realistically, I want to be a writer. Gary Shandling, writer, and then turned into performers. Seth Meyers, I think, another good example of that just now that you mentioned. You clearly have the chops or the personality where you could be a performer. You're witty, you've got some cleverness to you, all that kind of stuff. A brilliant writer. Clearly you've got tenacity to be able to work there as long as you did. Have you ever thought about getting in front of the camera?
I only in retrospect, and I regret that I didn't do it. Like I would do.
Is it too late? I mean, God, man. I mean, it doesn't look like it's too late.
I think, but no, but like I would occasionally do pieces on the show, and you know, only in retrospect now I think about how, like, you know, it's that thing you hear performers all the time where I would get very nervous beforehand, but then once it was going on, it was like the happiest I've ever been, and it just felt very freeing. And like I've heard actors and stuff talk that way, and like that's why I decided to become an actor. And now in my old age, I'm like, oh wow, maybe I should have pursued that avenue. But I guess I kind of always like the idea of writing and just having some time and some care and really, you know, being able to plan things out a little,
to polish it up and whatnot. Well, you know, you clearly have that delivery. We didn't do any pre-interview really before this thing. I'm just saying that as an organic reaction to our back and forth here. You know, if ever you decide to do a podcast or something like that, anything like that, you got a subscriber right here. You're very delightful when it comes to that.
Thank you.
No, of course. Talk about remotes. There's one in particular that came up. You used to write for Alan Coulter. Did you ever write any of Alan Coulter's remotes?
Oh, like the
or not remotes, but like sketches or
I would write some sketches for Alan. And I mean, the thing that jumps out about Alan is going back to the thing I said earlier about, you know, Biff is who he is and Rupert is who he is. And the show, like, to its credit, had a very kind of amateur hour quality to it. You know, like we weren't slick professionals, which was great and charming in its way. Sometimes as a writer, it was a little frustrating that, you know, you couldn't give like a big soliloquy to Rupert, you know, like,
he would love that, by the way.
but I would say that except for Alan.
Yeah.
Anything you threw at Alan, he could do it. He would elevate it. He would make it better. And just like, he was such a gift to the writing staff. Like it was just, I just loved his talent and being able to like give him a script and have him make it 5 times better.
He's incredible. Absolutely.
It was a pleasure writing for Alan.
I can imagine it was. I'm going to ask you on the spot here. If it wasn't you, I'm going to ask if you know who wrote it, because I definitely want to talk to them. My very favorite Alan Coulter moment of all time was a video package that you guys did. It didn't start with a video package. It started with him on stage, and randomly at some point he looks at Dave and goes, "Hey, Dave," and yes, Alan, and it cuts to Alan, and he's wearing a sailor suit.
Okay.
And he goes, aren't we gonna do my sailor sketch? And he's like, I'm sorry, Alan. We don't have time to do your sailor sketch. And Alan looks up and he leaves despondent. And then the video package starts, and it's him descending into an Apocalypse Now style horror. The horror, White Rabbit is playing by Jefferson Airplane. He breaks a glass and in the blood, and he puts it. Oh, it was my favorite moment by far. Did you write that?
I don't think I did. My guess, if I had to put money on it, I would say it was probably Carter Bays and Craig Thomas.
Okay.
They often captured Alan's descent into madness in a really nice way. So I would hazard a guess that was them. Okay.
Well, shout out to those guys, and hey, I'll get you my digits, boys. Let's.
Okay. Yeah.
I really want to be careful with your time here. What are you working on right now? Like, I mean, I've read a quote somewhere. It might have been from Ian's podcast. Now that I think about it, where you worked for the Late Show for a long time, and then you've been searching for jobs ever since, or something like that.
Yeah.
Tongue in cheek. Obviously, working with Strahan and all that. You've worked with Larry Wilmore. Oh, I gotta ask you about this. You helped write for the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
not much.
Okay, you're credited at it, and then so I saw that with Larry Wilmore. I'm like, oh shit, this is cool. This is what a
I mean, I like helped a teeny amount, but it was more. I was the head writer at the time at the Wilmore Show, so I was kind of tied up just with the show.
Yeah.
So okay. Like I went to a couple, like we had a couple meetings like to go over stuff like at night after the show, but Robin Thede, who's a great performer, and she was kind of the go-to writer for the correspondence thing. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I saw that and I was like, wow, what a thing to be involved in. Even on the surface, that's a really cool. Yeah. That's a cool thing that some of your stuff has gotten into a very exclusive room there. That's awesome. Right.
Yeah.
I always wish Dave would have hosted that event. That was always something I as a fan wanted to see. So what are you working on now?
Well, I have kids now, and I'm less interested in the kind of late night world, which is a grind. And so I've kind of been trying the past couple of years to like kind of develop a couple different sitcom ideas to varying degrees of success. So yeah, kind of writing scripts.
Good for you. Are you doing a lot of pitch meetings and things like that?
Some, which I'm, is an art that a skill that I do not have. There's, people in LA who do that kind of stuff a lot better than I, but I'm trying. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool, man. Well, I appreciate you so much for opening up your time to be part of this. We want to build something that really is kind of a living museum, an archive of again, I say it like I'm a broken record, of the greatest body of broadcasting work in history. You are a major part of that, Tommy. Before we take her home, are there any highlight moments? And if you're like the rest of the staff that I've talked to, you're terrible at taking compliments, and you're not very good at self-promotion, that kind of thing. That seems to be a family trait. But I'm gonna ask, is there something that jumps out at you, a moment that you're really proud of, a couple moments that are really proud of that you wrote?
I will mention this one because you like Star Wars.
Okay.
So this jumped to mind. Bill Clinton was a guest on our show one night. And so before he goes on for his guest segment, he's in an area that we call the airlock, which is just like, it's this little room right backstage where some of the staff hangs out, and where the guest waits right before they go on. Yep. So right before Clinton's segment, Dave's doing the top 10 list. That I forget the topic, but it was a topic that involved Star Wars.
Okay.
And so I had a joke that mentioned Chewbacca. And so Dave does the joke, and there's a monitor in the room, and people in the room are laughing, and Clinton turns to everybody in the room looking confused and said, "Now, who's Chewbacca?" So I one kind of like how I inadvertently got Bill Clinton to say Chewbacca, but I also find this, it's a question that's plagued me now for years, because we know what a liar Clinton is. I find it hard to believe.
Oh my God. That
Bill Clinton didn't know who Chewbacca was, because when Star Wars came out in 1977, he wasn't president. He was like, maybe, I don't know, attorney general in Arkansas. Like, the guy would have been aware. I think he likes to put on the aura that he's this world statesman. He doesn't have time for Chewbacca.
Sure.
But I think he was of an age where surely he was familiar with Chewbacca, and the guy does crossword puzzles, and so I don't know. That's just, I would love to really grill him on that, but
there's another element to that I think could be part of it. Bill Clinton has this aw shucks kind of charisma that to me, and I mean, no offense to any of the Clinton people who might ever hear this, that might be a little bit what Dave naturally has.
Kind of the aw shucks.
The aw shucks, yeah, that folksy kind of a. I think Clinton does a really good job of flipping that switch sometimes and turning it on. And the Chewbacca thing, it feels like, oh, this would be a fun thing to say, and flip that switch on, and they'll all like that. I've never heard of Chewbacca, like
Chewbacca,
yeah. That's a delightful memory. God damn, I cannot wait to share more of these with you at another time.
Sure.
Is there anything? Okay, so this is your first time on the Letterman podcast. We are, very, humble in what we're doing right now, and it's a studio that's in my basement that's about to be retrofitted, and we're going to do some really cool things with this. Any advice for me here?
Advice? No, none. You're doing great. This has been a pleasure. You keep a nice, smooth interview.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I think your space looks great, and the fact that you're going to make it even more beautiful, I think is just, it's dazzling. It's incredible. You're doing great.
They ain't seen nothing yet. I've got one way to wrap it up. This is the way we wrap it up with everybody. Dave, obviously doing the long form now, my next guest. We talk about Letterman with all of the phases of what he has done with equal adoration, because different strokes for different folks. Now that he's doing the long form, if there were 3 people that you would like to see Dave have on My Next Guest Needs No Introduction, who would those people be?
Tarantino.
Oh, what a great answer.
Just because I think Tarantino does a great interview, but then also Dave and Tarantino had trouble back in the day, and so
I remember. Yes,
I would like to hear an airing of that.
Yep.
I always enjoy Dave and Tom Hanks. I think that's always a great interview.
Yep.
I don't know. Springsteen.
There's a good answer too.
Yeah,
I love it.
Tom Hanks, Springsteen, and Tarantino.
That's fantastic. From the mouth of Tommy Ruprecht right here. You've heard it on the Letterman podcast. That is another episode. I love them. They go so fast, but it is so much fun going back and celebrating all of this work that the entire team, that Tommy and the entire team did, that was thrown down because they had a show the next day. Our job to pick up those pieces that got thrown down, unearth them, shine them back up again, and talk about them. Tommy, you are fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
I don't know. It was definitely my pleasure. If it was yours as well, that's a massive, massive bonus. That is another episode of the Letterman podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the only time I'm going to ask this. Like, share, subscribe in whatever order you want. We would love that. We are a little engine that could, and we really want to go some places. Once again, the Hello Deli, our only sponsor. The show is brought to you in part by the Hello Deli, hello-deli.com for all your Late Show with David Letterman stuff. And if you go down there, have a Paul Schaefer sandwich. Tell them it's on Mike. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.